From the Oklahoman newsroom, this is an OSU update. I'm Jenny Carlson here in studio with OSU beat writer Nathan Ruiz. Nathan, a huge result for the Cowboys last Saturday against Boise State. Won that game big for lots of reasons, but what we're seeing out of this defense, that was a real question mark going into that Boise State game. They played pretty well in the first two games, but clearly an acceleration of competition against Boise. But yet we saw a lot of the same out of them in terms of production. What has impressed you most as you've seen this defense continue to evolve under Jim Knowles?
I think undoubtedly it's the creativity that Jim Knowles has used, putting different guys in different positions. Calvin Bundage is a linebacker, but we've seen him on the defensive line. In this Boise State game was the first time we saw him take defensive linemen and kind of put them out in space as linebackers. Jordan Brailford was a guy that in particular was really being used in effective ways in that manner. I think he's just catching a lot of teams off guard because you're not expecting to see a defensive end at linebacker or a linebacker at defensive end. He's a guy who really got a praise for his creativity coming into this, and we're seeing it on display. You know, he's a Cornell alum, an Ivy League guy, so it's not surprising that he has some ingenuity to him, but I think once you see it on the field and you see all the different things that he's doing, it's catching us as media off guard, but I think it's definitely catching OSU's opponents off guard as well.
You mentioned the creativity, and we're seeing it in the numbers because if you just look at, let's say, sacks, pretty impressive, the total and the way that they're getting it. I mean, yes, Jordan Brailford was kind of the sack guy on Saturday against Boise, but he wasn't the only one. They were getting sacks from a lot of different players.
Yeah, OSU ends up with 7 sacks against Boise State. Now has a nation best 16 sacks across 3 games, 3 more than any other team in the country. I went back and looked. Over the past decade, OSU has only had 16 sacks in any 3-game period twice. And 2 of those 3 games were the same in each case. So this is a really rare situation for OSU. Jim Knowles really prides himself on blitzing and aggressive defense. And so I think maybe this might be a continuing trend. Obviously, I think teams will adjust over time. OSU's defense might get worn out. There might be injuries. But right now, I think there's a lot of reasons to be excited about this defense because of all the different ways that Jim Knowles is deploying it.
Lastly, as we look at this defense, one of the other questions sort of within the bigger question of the defense was youth. And we've seen some young guys out there, and we've seen them doing pretty well. Jarek Bernard may lead that list of guys that, you know, you weren't sure what he was going to be like, but he's playing a decent amount of snaps in that secondary, along with some other young guys. The youth and the production they're getting out of that youth, that has to be really positive for Jim Knowles.
Yeah, that was an area I think that OSU really circled early on, was where their freshmen were going to play, and not necessarily try to manage that 4-game redshirt, but they were going to be guys that played. Was in that secondary. Jim Knowles putting out that 4-2-5 defense. Need a lot of defensive backs on the field at any given time. We're seeing Jarek Bernard, Colby Peel, Tanner McAllister as guys who I think OSU is going to continue to play throughout the season, play big roles. Jarek Bernard making a huge impact. He's a veterinary science guy, really smart, came in with the body, the mindset, I think, to handle this kind of playing time early on. It's always a concern, Mike Gundy has said, to be able to put a true freshman out there and test them so early, but Jarek Bernard, Colby Peel are guys that have really answered that test early on.
All right, the tests continue on Saturday as Texas Tech comes to town. They like to throw it around a little bit. You may have heard 6 o'clock is kick time up at Boone Pickens Stadium. Game on FS1 if you're not headed up to see it in person. Be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.